Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters on France 24 with me, Nadia Massi. Here's what's coming up in this week's show. Global condemnation of Iran as it executes 2 more protesters. The UN accuses the regime of using the killings as a weapon to silence dissent. Left-wing and Palestinian MPs in Israel lead protests against the new government, considered the most far-right in the country's history. And shaking up the musical scene in Egypt, we meet 2 female DJs forging a path on the dance floor in the traditionally conservative society. Well, it's good to have you with us. Our top story on the programme: the United Nations Human Rights Chief has accused Iran of weaponising the death penalty to frighten the public and to crush dissent. The statement this Tuesday follows the execution of 4 protesters, 2 of whom were killed last weekend. The UN body says it has information that 2 more executions are imminent and over a dozen others are believed to be on death row. Well, this all comes, of course, as the Iranian regime is grappling to respond to months of unrest triggered by the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, in police custody. Well, to discuss all this, I'm very pleased to be joined on the programme by Shaparak Saleh. She's a Franco-Iranian lawyer and the co-founder of the campaigning organisation Femme Azadi, which was set up in the aftermath of Amini's death. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us on the programme, Ms. Saleh. Let's start first of all then by just getting your reaction to these latest executions in Iran.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. As you were saying, the regime has now executed 4 protesters. These executions are based on sham allegations and confessions, which have been obtained under torture, following expedited trials in which they were, the protesters were denied the assistance of lawyers of their choice, and where the convictions were based on shoddy evidence. On Saturday, Mohammed Mahdi Karami, a karate champion, and Sayed Mohammed Hosseini, a factory worker, were both hanged at dawn at the time at which the prayer takes place. And this follows 2 other executions of 2 other men, which happened in December. And one of them, Majid Reza Rahnavard, was hanged in public from a crane with a sack over his head. So news of that kind are, of course, horrific for the entire Iranian diaspora, and of course also for those who are fighting these battles on the ground.
And as part of your work with Femme Azadi here in France, I know you've been meeting French MPs to try and advocate and lobby on behalf of Iranian people, including those who are on death row. Just tell us how receptive politicians have been to you and the issues that you're trying to raise.
Well, they've been very receptive. They've often asked us, what can we do to help? So alongside with other collectives, we created a sponsorship program following the first executions. And what we tried to do was to make sure that each person at risk of execution was granted at least 1 sponsor, a member of French Parliament.
Well, tell us, given the fact that these 2 executions have taken place recently, has there been a reaction from those political sponsors that you just mentioned?
Well, yes. So one of the politicians is Clémentine Autain. She's from the party called La France Insoumise. And I saw that she tweeted that, she regretted that the person that she was sponsoring had been executed. And she was calling upon Emmanuel Macron to take actual actions at this point in time.
Indeed. In fact, what she says precisely is the president's silence towards the regime in Iran is unacceptable. Do you agree with her comments there? Has the President of the Republic been silent on this issue?
Well, I tend to agree with that comment in the sense that even though Emmanuel Macron has said that he is supporting the people in Iran, even though he's done meetings with Masih Alinejad here in Paris, there have been no actual concrete actions taken by the president. Even though I have to say over the past couple of days, some good news were announced, but at the government level and at the parliament level. So, for example, the British and French ministers of foreign affairs announced that they summoned the Islamic Republic ambassadors over the regime's execution. So that's a measure that we've been waiting for months.
So what more do you want the French government to do, perhaps the EU as well? I mean, are you calling for more sanctions on the Iranian regime?
We believe that further measures are needed and must be taken as swiftly as possible because, of course, each day that passes by, there's a risk that another protester will be executed. And so what is necessary at this time is to isolate and dry up the Republic, the Islamic Republic, both diplomatically and financially. And by that, I mean that the EU must call the regime by its name. The IRGC, the Pasdarans, the Basijis, and the political leaders must be put on the list of terrorist organizations. And I understand that this issue will be discussed at the European Parliament on the 16th of January in Strasbourg, and it should be a no-brainer. And the other thing that is necessary is to freeze these assets, because those very same people who decide that our youth in Iran ought to be executed for taking part in a protest for a strand of hair, they let their own kids live their best lives in Europe and Canada.
Well, you say, you know, this would be a no-brainer, but it would be a really big deal, wouldn't it, if parts of the Iranian regime were branded a terrorist organization or a terrorist entity in the way that you're suggesting? Do you think that's actually realistic?
Well, I do think it's realistic. I believe that there are a number of members of European Parliament who will be advocating for this to happen.
Shaparak Saleh, thanks very much indeed for talking to us on the programme. We appreciate your time and your perspective.
Many thanks.
Well, as we have been hearing there, 4 people have been executed since those protests began in Iran. However, human rights monitors say at least 16 others have been killed in detention centres in cases that are shrouded in mystery. Most of them are Kurds from the west of Iran, and the government has been trying to conceal their deaths. It is an issue that my colleague Ali Jani Ershad from our Observer's desk here at France 24 has been looking into. His full story is on our website right now. It's called Iran, Protesters Denied Medical Care and Tortured to Death in Secret Prisons. Now, in other news from Iran, dozens of people gathered outside the French embassy in Tehran over the weekend to voice their anger at cartoons published in the magazine Charlie Hebdo, which mock the country's clerical elite. Many of those protesting were religious students, some of whom set fire to French flags. While the Iranian regime itself has described the cartoons as insulting and indecent, in response, it has shut down a well-known French research institute in Tehran. Now, in news from elsewhere in the region, thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets in Tel Aviv to protest the most right-wing government in the country's history. The coalition assumed power at the end of December, and already there are fears of a rollback of rights, particularly for Palestinians and other minority groups.
Democracy now. The words written on signs as Israelis marched in the streets of Tel Aviv at the weekend. Waving rainbow flags and carrying torches, thousands protested against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's new government, considered to be one of the most right-wing in the country's history.
I came to protest to defend my future as an Israeli and as a Jew that wants to live in a democratic and safe country.
Netanyahu took office last month after winning the elections back in November. The 73-year-old has served as Prime Minister longer than anyone else. He's now at the head of a coalition with far-right and ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties. The new government has announced some policies that have raised concern. They include expanding settlements in the occupied West Bank, a law that could allow Parliament to override the Supreme Court, and social reforms that have some in the LGBTQ community worried.
And we can see right now many laws being advocated for against LGBTQ, against Palestinians, against larger minorities in Israel. And we are here to say loud and clear that all of us, Arabs and Jews and different various communities inside of Israel, demand peace, equality, justice for all of us, and that this is the home of all of us, and we're going to fight for it.
The opposition has accused the government of endangering Israel's entire legal system and says the latest reforms undermine its democratic institutions.
We end the programme in Egypt, where we're going to meet two women who are forging a path as DJs in the traditionally conservative society. James Facina has their story.
It's an unlikely occurrence, and all the more in Egypt. Yasmin Selectress gets the crowd dancing at a restaurant on the banks of the River Nile. She's one of just a few women who've made the leap into DJing in a country where women's rights are restricted and violence against them is rife.
DJing as a woman is somewhat of a double-edged sword. There are less female DJs here than elsewhere for quite obvious reasons. It's linked to the way we're brought up in our society, among other things.
But her passion is paying off, and her fans welcome the change.
I came specially to see Yasmin. There's no difference between men and women when it comes to music. That's something of the past. There are no differences between men and women these days.
All my life I've been seeing male DJs playing music. Where are the female DJs? They're never around. Now they're proving themselves. They're putting themselves on the main stage. But it's really nice to see that representation in the music scene.
But while Yasmin Selectress regularly crosses the Atlantic to play in New York, the opportunities are limited at home in Egypt.
The toughest part is that there aren't any venues. We need places where we can play out.
Away from the clubbing nightlife, Dalia Hassan has carved a name for herself in private circles.
We play at women-only events like henna nights or weddings where men and women hold separate parties. When there's a female DJ, women are more at ease. They feel free to do what they want, dress as they like, and dance freely. Especially considering that many women in Egypt wear a veil.
While change is undoubtedly happening within Egypt's music scene, a permanent shift of the status quo won't be easy. Whether they're male or female, DJs, rappers and modern dance music in general are all frowned upon by the country's cultural institutions.
And that's it for Middle East Matters this week. Thanks very much for watching, and do stay with us here on France 24. The show's back at the same time next week.